Is the CTE about to return? What is going on, guys? If there was some good Battlefield news on a Monday that personally I'd want to hear, that's some news about the CTE returning. Now, if you don't know what the CTE is, it stands for the Community Test Environment. Its most recent iteration was in Battlefield 1, where we as a community had a chance to test content in a special environment prior to its official release. By doing this, helped DICE really get valuable telemetry that you can't really get unless you have thousands and thousands of players testing out your game. Replying to some tweets from some noticeable figures in the Battlefield community in regards to the CTE returning in BF5, David Serlin, the multiplayer producer at DICE, replied was a simple "Amen, working on it." Now, before we go all into the significance of why this is such a big deal, then in my opinion, any other Battlefield before, David does want us to understand to take this with a pinch of salt, because their process and their goals tend to require lots of iterations to be fully realized. So like he says, we'll see where they land. But regardless of that kind of answering our question of how this is not going to come out tomorrow, I still very much want to do my part and do a video on really hoping DICE brings out the CTE. If there's one Battlefield game that I think needs it the most, it has been BF5. This game has hands down been one of the buggiest games I've ever played, and personally I've been at a peak of frustration for months now on the performance of BF5, whether you guys are aware of that or not. I personally try not to exasperate issues on this channel, especially ones you can't really do much about, but today gives me that flicker of hope we can actually do something about this. So despite this being conceptualized right now, it's enough for me to celebrate about. Now, what's kind of interesting is I did a video very similar to the one I'm doing right now way back almost a year ago. I was again getting tweets from David Serlin basically arguing his points on why we need the CTE in BF5. I rewatched that video today, and basically everything in that video is still relevant and dives into a lot more details about the benefits of the CTE and what we should expect if it makes it into BF5. But I'll give you some of the cliff notes here, such as, should we expect it to make it just for PC, or will Xbox and PS4 get the CTE as well? If you guys remember, in BF1, the CTE was only available for PC at first, but then they were able to get it to Xbox and PS4, primarily because EA owns Origin, so it's much easier for them to get it on PC at first, but they were eventually able to get it through Microsoft and Sony. David did make mention way back a year ago that all platforms should be there at launch for the CTE, but it should be a bit different considering the CTE was behind the whole premium pass. So players who had the premium were able to access the CTE, while players who did not were not able to access the CTE. Now that BF5 has no premium at all, well, anyone should be able to access this in BF5, and that's probably the biggest iteration on making this happen, is exactly how are they actually going to introduce this into Battlefield 5. In BF1, they had a completely separate quote-unquote game to download in the store, and I imagine that's something you don't easily throw together overnight and set it in the next morning. I see this probably being the biggest hurdle, considering they already were able to pass the CTE for BF1 through the Xbox and PS4 platforms, so I can't see that being the biggest hurdle again. And even if it was, they could still get it out on PC, so that shouldn't be a hurdle at all. So I imagine, again, probably the biggest jump to making this into Battlefield 5 is exactly how they're going to bring this in. Is they going to bring it in as a standalone game, or going to bring it in into BF5 itself? With all that said, though, I do want to take a step back and talk about the biggest concern I know a lot of people have with the CTE, and that is it spoils content. But what is interesting as Battlefield 5 has progressed, I think that argument has held less and less weight, even though it still is true up to a point, and I will talk about that here in a second. But the fact is, Battlefield 5 has been struggling to bring content out, and when it comes out, it is way too buggy. So in my opinion, now more than ever, the CTE needs its chance, and it's honestly going to give the extra nudge that Battlefield really needs to finally get up to the normal Battlefield type experience we all expect. I think this past year has shifted the scales dramatically, the use case of the CTE over any loss that the CTE gives by spoiling content. There's just nothing like having thousands of players testing out your game. That stuff you just can't get in-house testing. So, of course, this does somewhat spoil content. There's no denying that. But for those who are still concerned about this, do check back at my older video, and it shows you the white box environment. David actually kind of alludes to this in his older tweets, where it's an environment that is nowhere near the polished version of what it will be like in the base version of a Battlefield game. It's just mainly the bare bones of the map, and it's just there to give DICE the core data that they really need, because again, it's just a testing environment. It's not meant to be the fully polished base version of a Battlefield game. So yeah, it's meant to have just the bare bones of it, and that's what they do. So do check back at that video and you'll see what this actually looks like. What's really nice too is if this makes it out, which, man, DICE, please, because there's no premium and all players should be able to access CTE. In my opinion, there should be more lobbies filled for the CTE. At least I think there should be. I mean, I'm not sure if the player count for BF5 right now is the same for when BF1 launched its CTE for consoles, which again was like a year after launch of BF1, because I remember testing out Lepco Pass, and I think that came out around like August or September time. And I remember this, like, playing Lepco Pass and seeing it in the CTE. They're playing in the base version, and all the flags kind of being like flipped around, because I think they mirrored the CTE, and because of that, it just had me all like confused. So that was their way of trying not to spoil content by like moving the flags around or like mirroring the map. But I remember after launch of the CTE, the hype kind of simmered down, and it was getting harder and harder to fill up the lobbies, which again kind of defeats the purpose of having a CTE, because we want to test out the maps in the full 64-player experience. So in response to this, DICE created very specific shorter times to test out the maps in the CTE, so players would all rush in at that certain time and fill up the lobbies. However, due to the shortened testing times, a lot of players missed out and weren't able to contribute their feedback. So hopefully, because more players can access the CTE because there's no premium, this will mean that lobbies will be filled frequently. But it's giving me a lot of promise that this could possibly make it in. Again, we got to take everything with a grain of salt. It's not fully realized right now, but just considering how it was in BF1, where almost a year later we saw the CTE. And even though I'm not expecting to see it this month or next month or probably even at the end of the year, it is nice to know that at least it's being considered, because this will greatly improve Battlefield 5 in my opinion. I think this is a big move if they can make this happen. Again, it will probably be pushed back a little bit because specific theater has already been worked on, so I don't think there's any need for them to be working and having this being all tested out right now, because if they did do it, I bet it's much further down the pipeline than the white box environment we saw in the previous testing environment. So I imagine it's more textured and layered by now, at least I hope, right? So yeah, I would expect it anytime soon, but this could help us in the chapters in the future, and it could maybe bring Battlefield up to speed and make it into the game that we all hoped it would be. But let me know what you guys think about this. Do you think the CTE is a good or bad thing? Feel free to let me know in the comments down below. But that's it for you guys today. Again, I always appreciate you guys being here. I'm Livin', and I'll catch you guys again later.